I refused to invite my evil stepmom, who bullied me for years, to my wedding. My dad then threatened to skip it too unless I let her come, so I uninvited him as well. I, 28F, am getting married to my wonderful fiancé Jake, 30M, in 2 months. We've been planning our dream wedding for over a year now, and everything was going smoothly until the drama with my family started. Before I dive into the current situation, I need to give you all some background on my family dynamics. My mom, Sarah, was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer when I was 10. She fought hard for 2 years, but ultimately passed away when I was 12. Those 2 years were a blur of hospital visits, hushed conversations, and trying to pretend everything was normal at school. My dad, Tom, was devastated. He threw himself into work, leaving me to deal with my grief mostly alone. I remember the day of Mom's funeral vividly. It was raining, which felt appropriate. As they lowered her casket into the ground, I clutched the locket she had given me before she died. Inside was a picture of us together, smiling at the beach during our last family vacation before she got sick. That locket became my most prized possession. For the next 2 years, it was just Dad and me. We were like ships passing in the night, both lost in our own grief. I tried to take care of things at home, teaching myself to cook and do laundry from YouTube videos. Dad would come home late, eat whatever I had managed to prepare, and then retreat to his study with a bottle of whiskey. Then, when I was 14, Dad announced he had met someone. Her name was Linda, now 50F, and she had 2 kids of her own, a daughter, Megan, now 32F, and a son, Ethan, now 30M. At first, I was cautiously optimistic. Maybe this would help Dad heal. Maybe I'd have siblings to talk to. Maybe things would get better. Linda seemed nice enough when I first met her. She complimented my hair, which I had recently dyed purple in a fit of teenage rebellion, and asked about my hobbies. Her kids were polite but distant. Megan was already in college, and Ethan was about to start. I felt a bit intimidated by them, but hoped we might become friends over time. Dad and Linda got married in a small ceremony just 6 months after they started dating. I was the reluctant flower girl, feeling too old for the role but not wanting to disappoint my dad. As I watched them exchange vows, I felt a mix of hope and unease. Little did I know how justified that unease would turn out to be. The honeymoon phase lasted about 3 months. During that time, Linda redecorated our entire house. She said it needed a woman's touch, which felt like a slap in the face to my mom's memory. But Dad seemed happier than he had been in years, so I bit my tongue and tried to adapt. Then, slowly but surely, Linda's true colors started to show. It started with small things. 1. She reorganized my room while I was at school, throwing out posters she deemed childish and rearranging my furniture without asking. 2. She implemented a strict chore schedule, giving me significantly more tasks than Ethan when he was home from college. 3. She criticized my clothing choices, calling them attention-seeking and trying to force me into more conservative outfits. 4. She would make backhanded compliments about my appearance, like you'd be so pretty if you just lost a little weight or your hair would look so much nicer if you didn't dye it those crazy colors. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was just trying to establish her role in the family. But as time went on, her behavior got worse. 5. She accidentally threw away my mom's jewelry that I was supposed to inherit when I turned 18. When I confronted her, she said I was being materialistic and should let go of the past. The locket my mom gave me was among the pieces that disappeared. I was heartbroken. 6. She would often forget to include me in family dinners, leaving me to fend for myself while she, my dad, and her 2 kids ate together. I'd come home from after-school activities to find empty pizza boxes or dishes in the sink, with no leftovers saved for me. 7. On my 16th birthday, she convinced my dad that I didn't need a party because I hadn't earned it with my grades. In reality, I was a straight A student, but she always downplayed my achievements. I spent that birthday alone in my room, crying and looking at old photos of my mom. 8. She once told me that no one would ever love me because I was damaged goods from losing my mom at a young age. This comment came after I had my first heartbreak when my high school boyfriend broke up with me. 9. When I got into my dream college, she tried to convince my dad not to help me financially because she has 2 kids to think about for college too. Never mind that both Megan and Ethan had already graduated and were working full-time jobs. 10. She would read my diary and then use the information to manipulate situations. For example, when I wrote about having a crush on a girl in my class, "I'm bisexual," she told my conservative grandparents that I was confused and needed therapy. Throughout all of this, my dad remained largely oblivious. He was finally happy again, and I think he didn't want to see anything that might disrupt that happiness. When I tried to tell him about Linda's behavior, she would twist my words and make it seem like I was just being a difficult teenager. There was one incident that really stands out in my memory. It was the night of my high school graduation. I had been named valedictorian and had given a speech that received a standing ovation. My dad hugged me afterward, tears in his eyes, telling me how proud he was and how much my mom would have loved to see this. Later that night, I overheard Linda talking to him in their bedroom. She was saying things like, "I know you're proud of her, but don't you think you're overdoing it? We don't want Megan and Ethan to feel less valued." And then, the kicker, besides, it's not like her speech was that original. I'm sure she copied most of it from the internet. I was crushed. Not just by Linda's words, but by my dad's silence in response. He didn't defend me. He didn't point out how hard I had worked. He just mumbled something non-committal and changed the subject. That was the night I decided I needed to get out as soon as possible. I spent the next year focusing all my energy on scholarships and financial aid applications. I was determined to go to college without needing any money from my dad or Linda. The day I moved out for college was both terrifying and liberating. As I packed up my car, Linda made a show of crying and saying how much she'd miss me. But when she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "Don't bother coming back. You don't belong here anymore." I cried the entire drive to campus, a mix of relief, fear, and lingering hurt. But as I settled into my dorm room and met my new roommate, I felt a glimmer of hope. This was my chance to start fresh, to be myself without Linda's constant criticism. College was a transformative experience for me. I made real friends for the first time in years. I joined clubs, discovered new passions, and even started seeing a therapist to work through my family issues. It was in therapy that I first used the word abuse to describe Linda's treatment of me. I kept minimal contact with my family during college. I'd call my dad on holidays and his birthday, but I always made excuses not to come home for breaks. I worked part-time jobs and stayed with friends instead. Dad seemed hurt by this, but he never pushed too hard. It was during my junior year of college that I met Jake. We were paired up for a group project in our environmental science class. He was kind, funny, and incredibly easy to talk to. For the first time, I found myself opening up to someone about my family situation. Jake was supportive from the start. He listened without judgment and offered comfort when I needed it. He also shared some of his own family struggles. His parents had divorced when he was young, and he had dealt with his fair share of stepfamily drama. As our relationship grew serious, Jake encouraged me to try to reconnect with my dad. He pointed out that while my dad had made mistakes, he might not fully understand the situation. It took some convincing, but eventually, I agreed to reach out. I invited my dad to meet me for coffee during one of my school breaks. I was a nervous wreck waiting for him at the cafe. When he arrived, he looked older than I remembered, with more gray in his hair and lines around his eyes. Our conversation was awkward at first, full of small talk about school and work. But as we relaxed, I found the courage to open up about how I had felt during my teenage years. I told him about Linda's behavior, the isolation, the constant criticism. To my surprise, Dad listened. Really listened. And then he started to cry. He apologized for not seeing what was happening, for not protecting me. He said he had been so afraid of being alone after Mom died that he had blinded himself to Linda's faults. It wasn't a magical fix-everything moment, but it was a start. We agreed to keep in touch more regularly and to try to rebuild our relationship. Dad even suggested coming to visit me at school, just the two of us. Over the next few years, Dad and I slowly repaired our bond. It wasn't always easy, there were setbacks and arguments, especially when Linda was involved. But we kept trying. When Jake proposed to me after graduation, Dad was one of the first people I called. He sounded genuinely happy for me. And then he asked the question I had been dreading, "Will you be inviting Linda to the wedding?" I took a deep breath and told him the truth, that I wasn't comfortable having Linda there on my special day. To my relief, he didn't argue. He said he understood and that he would talk to Linda about it. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. A week later, I got a call from Dad. He said Linda was upset about not being invited and that he felt torn. He suggested a compromise. What if Linda came to the ceremony but not the reception? I stood my ground. I explained that this day was about Jake and me, and I wanted to be surrounded by people who truly loved and supported us. Having Linda there, even for part of the day, would put a cloud over the celebration. That's when Dad dropped the bombshell. He said if Linda wasn't welcome, then he wouldn't come either. He accused me of being selfish and trying to tear the family apart. I was stunned. After all the progress we had made, after all the conversations about how he had failed to protect me in the past, he was choosing Linda over me again. Through tears, I told him that if that's how he felt, maybe it was best if he didn't come at all. The call ended with both of us angry and hurt. What followed was a barrage of messages and calls from Linda, her kids, and even some extended family members. They all said I was being a bridezilla and tearing the family apart. Linda's messages were particularly nasty, calling me ungrateful and saying I was punishing her for trying to be a mother to me. I didn't respond to any of them and instead blocked their numbers. I thought that would be the end of it, but oh boy, was I wrong. A week later, I was at a cake tasting with Jake when I got a call from my grandmother, Dad's mom. She's always been kind to me, so I answered. She told me that my dad and Linda had shown up at her house, crying about how I was excluding them from the wedding. They had apparently spun some story about how they've always treated me like their own daughter and couldn't understand why I was being so cruel. I was furious. I told my grandmother the truth about how Linda had treated me over the years and how Dad had always turned a blind eye. She was shocked and said she had no idea. She apologized for calling and said she would talk to my dad. The next day, I received an email from my dad. He said he had spoken with my grandmother and realized he might have missed some things over the years. He apologized for not being there for me and asked if we could meet to talk things over. He said he still wanted to come to the wedding, even if Linda wasn't invited. I was conflicted. On one hand, I've always wanted a better relationship with my dad. On the other hand, this felt like too little, too late. After discussing it with Jake and my therapist, I decided to meet with my dad. We met at a neutral coffee shop. The conversation was awkward and tense at first, but as we talked, my dad seemed to really listen for the first time in years. He admitted that he had been so focused on his new marriage and making it work that he had neglected me. He said he was sorry for not seeing how Linda had treated me and for not protecting me. I told him about the specific incidents I mentioned earlier, and he looked genuinely shocked and upset. He said he had no idea about the jewelry or the birthday party, and he thought I had chosen not to join family dinners. It became clear that Linda had been manipulating both of us for years. By the end of our meeting, we were both in tears. My dad promised to do better and said he wanted to be part of my life again. He also said he understood why I didn't want Linda at the wedding and that he would respect my decision. I left feeling cautiously optimistic. I told my dad he could come to the wedding, but that we still had a lot of work to do on our relationship. He agreed and said he was willing to put in the effort. When I got home, I received a text from Linda. Apparently, my dad had told her about our conversation and that he would be attending the wedding without her. Her message was full of vitriol, accusing me of turning my dad against her and threatening to expose me to the rest of the family. I showed the message to my dad, and to my surprise, he immediately called Linda and told her to stop harassing me. He said if she couldn't respect his relationship with his daughter, they would have serious problems. The weeks leading up to the wedding were relatively peaceful after that. My dad and I had regular coffee meetups, and he even offered to help with some of the wedding planning. It felt strange but nice to have him involved. As the wedding day approached, I found myself dealing with a mix of emotions. I was excited to marry Jake, of course, but I also felt a lingering sadness about the family drama. I wished my mom could be there to see me get married. I wished I had a normal, loving relationship with my stepmom. I wish things hadn't been so complicated for so long. The night before the wedding, I had a panic attack. All the stress and emotions of the past few months came crashing down on me. Jake found me crying in our bathroom, hyperventilating. He sat with me, held me, and reminded me to breathe. We stayed up late, talking about our hopes for the future and how we would build our own family, one based on love, trust, and mutual respect. The day of the wedding arrived, and despite my nerves, everything was beautiful. Jake and I exchanged vows surrounded by our loved ones, and for once, family drama was the last thing on my mind. My dad walked me down the aisle, both of us teary-eyed. As he gave me away, he whispered, "Your mom would be so proud of you." During the reception, my dad gave a heartfelt speech. He talked about how proud he was of me and how sorry he was for the years we'd lost. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. He also acknowledged his own failings as a father and promised to do better moving forward. As Jake and I were getting ready to leave for our honeymoon, my dad pulled me aside. He told me that he had filed for divorce from Linda. He said our conversations had made him realize how toxic she was and that he couldn't stay in a marriage with someone who had hurt his daughter so much. I was stunned. Part of me felt guilty for potentially breaking up their marriage, but a larger part felt relieved and vindicated. My dad hugged me and said he hoped we could continue to rebuild our relationship. Our honeymoon was a blissful escape from all the family drama. Jake and I spent 2 weeks in Bali, exploring temples, lounging on beaches, and dreaming about our future together. We talked about having kids someday and how we would make sure they always felt loved and supported. When we returned home, reality set back in. Linda had apparently gone on a rampage, telling anyone who would listen that I had manipulated my dad and destroyed their marriage. Some family members took her side, sending me nasty messages about how I was a homewrecker. But surprisingly, many others reached out to offer support. My grandmother apologized again for not seeing what was happening and promised to be there for me moving forward. It's been 6 months since the wedding, and things are still a work in progress with my dad. We're in family therapy together, working through years of hurt and misunderstandings. It's not always easy, but it feels worth it. Our first therapy session was incredibly emotional. Dad broke down as he listened to me recount specific incidents of Linda's abuse. He kept saying, "I'm so sorry, I should have protected you." It was painful but also cathartic to finally have him truly hear and acknowledge my experiences. The therapist has been helping us establish healthy boundaries and communication patterns. We're learning how to express our feelings without accusation and how to listen without becoming defensive. It's a slow process, but I can already see improvements in our relationship. One particularly breakthrough moment came when we discussed the loss of my mom's jewelry. Dad had no idea that Linda had sold some of the pieces. He was devastated and immediately promised to help me track down what was sold and try to recover it. True to his word, Dad hired a private investigator to trace the jewelry. So far, we've managed to recover my mom's engagement ring and a pair of earrings she wore on her wedding day. Holding these pieces again brought back a flood of memories and meant more to me than I can express. The search for the locket is still ongoing. Dad remembered that it was a custom piece and has been reaching out to local jewelers to see if anyone recalls working on it. He's determined to find it, and his efforts mean the world to me. As for Linda, the divorce proceedings have been messy, to say the least. She's fighting for a large settlement, claiming that she gave up her career to be a stepmother, conveniently forgetting how she treated me. Dad's lawyer is using the evidence of her mistreatment of me as leverage in the negotiations. Linda has been relentless in her attempts to contact both me and my dad. She alternates between tearful apologies and vicious threats. We've had to change our phone numbers and email addresses to avoid her harassment. We're currently in the process of filing for a restraining order. Her kids, Megan and Ethan, have also reached out. To my surprise, Megan apologized for not seeing what was happening when we were younger. She shared some of her own struggles with her mother's behavior and expressed a desire to reconnect. We've had a few cautious but positive conversations since then. Ethan, on the other hand, is firmly on his mother's side. He sent me a long, angry email accusing me of ruining their family for attention. I chose not to respond and instead forwarded the email to our lawyer to add to the file for the restraining order. In the midst of all this family drama, Jake has been my rock. He's been incredibly patient and supportive, even when wedding planning got stressful with all the family drama. He comes with me to therapy sessions when I need extra support and always knows how to make me laugh when things get too heavy. We're settling into married life and it's wonderful. We've bought our first home together, a cozy little house with a garden where I'm trying, and mostly failing, to grow vegetables. Jake jokes that my black thumb is genetic, reminding me of how my mom could never keep a houseplant alive. These little moments, laughing over my sad, wilting tomato plants, or Jake's disastrous attempts at making my mom's lasagna recipe, are healing in their own way. They remind me that it's possible to honor the memory of those we've lost while still moving forward and creating new joy. Work has been a welcome distraction from the family drama. I recently got promoted to senior environmental scientist at the nonprofit where I work. We're currently working on a project to restore wetlands in the area, and it feels good to be making a positive impact on the world. Jake and I are also starting to talk about having kids of our own. It's exciting but also terrifying. I worry about repeating the cycle of family dysfunction, but Jake reminds me that being aware of these issues is the first step in breaking the cycle. We've both agreed to continue with therapy, both individually and as a couple, as we plan for this next chapter of our lives. We want to make sure we're in the best possible mental and emotional state before bringing a child into the world. As for my dad, he's making efforts to be more present in my life. He calls regularly just to chat, remembers important dates without prompting, and has even started learning to cook so he can invite Jake and me over for dinner. It's not perfect, there are still moments of tension and old hurts that resurface, but it's so much better than I ever thought possible. Last week, Dad surprised me by showing up at my office with lunch. As we sat in the park near my workplace, eating sandwiches and talking about my latest project, I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. It was a simple moment, but it felt like a glimpse of what our relationship could have been all along, and what it might become. Of course, Not everything is smooth sailing. I still have nightmares sometimes about my teenage years. I still flinch when I hear someone who sounds like Linda. And there are days when the weight of everything that happened feels overwhelming. But I'm learning to be gentle with myself on those difficult days. I'm learning that healing isn't linear, and that it's okay to have setbacks. I'm surrounded by people who love and support me now, and that makes all the difference. I'm also trying to find ways to use my experiences to help others. I've started volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring teenagers who come from difficult family situations. It feels empowering to be able to offer support and understanding to kids who are going through similar struggles. As for Linda, I heard through the grapevine that she's been bad-mouthing me to anyone who will listen. But honestly, I don't care anymore. I'm happily married to the love of my life, I'm rebuilding my relationship with my dad, and I'm finally free from her toxic influence. Looking back on everything that's happened, from the day my mom died to now, I can see how far I've come. There were times when I thought I'd never be happy, times when the pain and loneliness felt insurmountable. But here I am, surrounded by love, pursuing a career I'm passionate about, and finally feeling like I belong somewhere. So, Reddit, was I the asshole for uninviting my dad when he tried to force me to include my stepmom? And was I right to give him another chance? I still grapple with these questions sometimes. But I'm learning that life isn't always about being right or wrong. Sometimes it's about making the best decisions we can with the information we have, and being open to growth and change. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if my relationship with my dad will ever be completely healed, or if Linda will ever truly leave us alone. But I do know that I'm stronger now than I've ever been. I know that I have the power to shape my own life and create the family I've always wanted. To anyone out there dealing with toxic family members or difficult relationships, hang in there. It's okay to set boundaries, it's okay to put yourself first, and it's okay to hope for better. Healing is possible, even if the road is long and winding. Thank you all for listening to my story. Your support and kind words have meant more than you know during this difficult journey. Edit 1. Wow, this blew up overnight. Thank you all for your supportive comments and awards. I'll try to answer some of the most common questions. 1. Yes, we're still pursuing legal action against Linda for the stolen jewelry. The private investigator has some promising leads, and we're hopeful about recovering more pieces. 2. For those asking about Linda's kids, Megan and I have been cautiously rebuilding a relationship. We meet for coffee occasionally and are taking things slow. Ethan is still not speaking to me, which is painful but understandable given the circumstances. 3. My mom's side of the family has been incredibly supportive throughout all of this. My maternal grandparents walked me down the aisle at the wedding alongside my dad, which was a beautiful moment. 4. To those sharing similar stories about toxic step-parents, I'm so sorry you've gone through that. Therapy has been immensely helpful for me, and I highly recommend it if you're struggling. 5. For the people asking if this is fake because it seems too perfect, I wish it was. While I'm happy things are improving with my dad, it doesn't erase years of pain and neglect. We still have a long way to go. 6. Jake and I are still discussing starting a family. We're in no rush and want to make sure we're both ready emotionally and financially before taking that step. 7. To the person who asked about my career, yes, I'm still working in environmental science. My current project involves wetland restoration, which is challenging but incredibly rewarding. 8. For those wondering about my mental health, I'm doing much better, but it's an ongoing process. I still have bad days, but they're becoming less frequent. My therapist has been amazing in helping me develop coping strategies. Edit 2. Since so many people are asking for an update, here's what's happened in the month since I originally posted. 1. The divorce between my dad and Linda is moving forward. It's getting messy, as divorce often does, but my dad seems relieved to be out of the relationship. 2. We've made some progress in tracking down my mom's missing jewelry. We recovered a bracelet last week that I thought was lost forever. Holding it again brought back so many memories. 3. Linda's harassment has escalated. We've had to involve the police, and we're in the process of getting a restraining order. 4. My relationship with my dad continues to improve. We had a breakthrough in therapy last week when we were able to discuss the night of my high school graduation without either of us shutting down emotionally. 5. Jake and I are settling into married life and it's wonderful. We're planning a belated honeymoon to Japan next spring. 6. I've started a support group at the youth center where I volunteer for teens dealing with blended family issues. It feels good to use my experiences to help others. 7. Megan, Linda's daughter, and I had a long, emotional conversation where she shared some of her own struggles with her mother. We're slowly building a friendship. Thank you all again for your kind words and advice. This community has been incredibly supportive during a difficult time. Final edit: it's been a year since my original post, and so much has changed. I wanted to give you all one last update. 1. The divorce between my dad and Linda was finalized 6 months ago. It was a long and bitter process, but it's finally over. 2. We were able to recover most of my mom's jewelry through legal action. The locket is still missing, but a kind Redditor who is a jeweler offered to recreate it based on my description and old photos. It's not the original, but it means so much to have it back, in a way. 3. Linda eventually moved out of state. We haven't heard from her in months, and honestly, it's a relief. The restraining order is still in place, just in case. 4. My dad and I continue to work on our relationship. We have our ups and downs, but overall, things are better than they've been since I was a kid. He's been going to therapy on his own, which has helped a lot. 5. Jake and I celebrated our first anniversary last month. We're talking about starting a family soon, which is both exciting and terrifying. 6. I'm still in therapy, working through the lingering effects of my childhood. It's an ongoing process, but I'm in a much better place now than I was a year ago. 7. The support group at the youth center has grown. We're now working with the local school district to implement a peer support program for kids from blended families. 8. Megan and I have become close friends. She's even talking about moving to our city to be closer to us. Ethan is still distant, but he sent a civil email on my birthday, which feels like progress. 9. I got a promotion at work and am now leading my own team on a major conservation project. It feels good to be making a difference in the world. 10. Jake and I bought a house with a bigger garden. My vegetable growing skills have improved slightly. We actually got some edible tomatoes this year. To everyone who shared their own stories, offered advice, or just sent kind words, thank you. Your support meant more than you know during a really difficult time. And to anyone out there dealing with toxic family members or difficult relationships, hang in there. It's okay to set boundaries, it's okay to put yourself first, and it's okay to hope for better. Healing is possible, even if it doesn't always feel like it. Sending love and strength to all of you.